La la la. Welcome. This is always the hardest part, is the intro. I even have it. I have it written here. Intro. Do intro. Welcome back, guys. Thank you for coming back. Thank you for watching all the previous videos. I have heard you and I am listening. Today's video is all about one thing that everybody has been asking me. How do you make a mold? More specifically, one of my matrix molds. Now, today's video is going to demonstrate how I made a matrix mold of my jitters mask. The one that actually you guys saw me previously inject. That mask, I'm going to be showing you how to make that. So, a couple of things that I'm going to talk about before the video starts is 1, safety. 2 is going to be a brief description of the video and some things that will be missing, because when I recorded all of the footage, it took a few days to do it. And at the end of it, I was tired and I wasn't really thinking ahead. So there's a couple of steps that aren't in there, but I'm going to be freezing the video for you guys and explaining what actually happened in between the two processes. So let's talk about safety. Okay, guys, first step, when it comes to safety, when it comes to mold making, when it comes to any kind of chemicals, you're going to want a respirator, just like this. This respirator has served me just a long time. It's been, I actually probably got to get a new one. But the most important part of this is that it has particulate filter, which is like this little, I don't know, cotton thing. That's a first filter. The second is the cartridge itself. This is actually a chemical filter or a filter for harmful vapors. Make sure that you get one for harmful vapors or just vapors, because that is going to be the most important, because those vapors, if you have the wrong filter, are just going to go right in there, right through the filter, go right into your lungs. You don't want that. So a good respirator, if working with any kind of chemicals, that's your first. Second, natural gloves. Don't fall for, hey, only Home Depot has them for $20 a box. It's ridiculous. Go to your local Harbor Freight, $9 for a box. They have walls of them. So these. Now, some people would actually just call it quits with gloves. I personally, when it comes to making molds, I like to use sleeves. These, actually use these sleeves. This is one sleeve I used to paint this guy, actually, that little guy right there, Hermes. These are great because as you're holding a piece for painting, or whenever you're just mold making and dapping things on, you're not going to get any on your arms. There have been many times where I have worn my gloves and I go home, take the gloves off, from here up, pristine. It's beautiful. Here down, nothing but paint. Like, that doesn't do anybody any good. So that is going to be, I think, number 3 on the list. This, if you're cutting anything, your goggles, you always want to wear these whenever you're cutting anything. That's a good bit of noise. Your goggles, you always want to wear these whenever you're cutting anything. Okay, that's going to wind up being a noise. It's just going to keep on coming through. Yeah, goggles. These are going to be another thing that you want to wear if you're cutting anything, trimming anything, even if you're blowing anything out. There have been many times where I haven't worn goggles or glasses and a little piece of whatever just flies right in my eye. It sucks, especially when you're mixing. You don't want any of that in your eyes. I have gotten chemicals in my eyes before. It sucks. So make sure you wear your goggles when needed. So, okay, that's it for our safety. Let's move on to a little disclaimer about the video. Okay, guys, now that we have safety out the way, one thing I want to say about this video is that I recorded all the footage previously as I was molding the jitters mask. Now, most of it is really good footage. I set it up so you can see everything, and I'll be voicing over to tell you all the steps involved in what you're seeing. Now, I do skip ahead in some parts of the process because I did not film them. It was a multi-day process, and at the end of it, I was just ready for this thing to get wrapped up. So that's on me. What will happen is in the future, as I'm molding ones such as the Nautilus sculpt, I'll be recording every step, making sure to show you every part, and discussing all the materials that I used. So just bear in mind, if you do see something, or you miss something, or you don't know what happened, I will be explaining it to the best of my abilities. If I've missed something, in the comments below, go ahead and ask what it was I did at what minute. I'll take a look at it and try to respond to you guys. One last thing, guys. If you enjoy this content, if you enjoy the videos that I'm making, all this old school molding, casting, sculpting, all of that fun stuff, please like this video, comment below with any questions you may have, subscribe to the channel if you've already subscribed, just share this content with others so other people can also learn exactly what I'm doing. But let's go ahead and get on with the video. Thanks, guys. Okay, guys, firstly, I apologize that the video was recorded in portrait mode and not landscape mode. Moving on, what you see me doing here is building up what's called the flange. I'm taking wads of water-based clay and I'm building them up around the seam line or the future seam line of the piece. You'll also notice that I have the piece wrapped in a bag that is to protect it from both the clay and handling. As you can see, my hand does go on top of it a couple of times. I'm smoothing out the clay wall with an assortment of tools, whether that's a steel, also known as a kidney, or a paint scraper. These help actually level off the entire plane of the flange, which allows for the piece to be completely draftable. That's very important because you don't want anything actually locking in place or interlocking. So I'm going through, now that I have the clay built up to the actual seam line, I am smoothing it out to a certain point. And I'm also going to clean up the shape of it as well, trimming it with the knife. And I'm filling in, as you can see, filling in all of the small little holes and pock marks in the clay, making sure that there's nothing that can translate to a locking point in the future once I lay fiberglass on the piece itself. Also, a quick little tip: if the piece is covered completely, you can use a little bit of alcohol to smooth out the clay instead of using water, because water does create a little bit of a mess. Once again, just raking the surface with the kidney tool, also known as a steel, and cleaning up the surface to a point where I can begin to lay up the piece itself with clay. One other thing to note is that the piece is not actually secured to anything outside of foam blocks. That's because it's not necessary for me to keep this in place. As you will see, after I fiberglass it, I pull the entire piece off so I can clay off the back end. Now here you see what I have is clay. It's a clay rib. I have a board off the camera that allows me to cut the clay slab into even thicknesses. So what I do is I take a paint stick and I use that as my gauge, and I cut slices of that. With those pieces, I initially lay them down on the surface that's actually connected to the flange. It's where the clay flange meets the piece itself. So I'll continue to do this. I'll go around creating a perimeter around the piece, giving me a base thickness to work off of. Now, this is important how you handle this. You don't want to smash them into the piece because you want it to be an overall even thickness. If you smash the clay into the piece, causing a thin piece of clay, that translates to a thin piece of silicone, and you do not want that. So, like I said, handle this part with care as you're claying up the entire piece. I'm going around trimming the pieces and then adding them around the perimeter of the mask itself. I do this on all of my pieces, whether that's a full helmet or a half mask. So I'm going to fast forward this in a second. What you'll see is that I take the same thickness of pieces, but just larger, and I begin to cover the mask itself. Now, I'm not, like I said, I'm not pressing down too hard. I'm simply cutting and placing in place. And the good thing about this part is that any little spaces left over, since there's an overall thickness determined, I can fill it in with little wads of clay. And I will do what I did to the clay flange itself and rake it down, smooth it down with some water. But like I said, you can also use alcohol if your piece is truly protected. So once the surface area has been established, I will go in and just begin to clean up everything, smooth it out, not to perfection, but I will begin to make sure everything is nice and tidy. So once this is actually done, you'll see I'll use the same ribs that I first used in this initial clay up, and I'll create registration marks, and you'll see what that is. It's pretty much, I'm creating a flange around the piece that's going to translate into silicone. But for right now, I'm still cleaning off the piece using this kidney right here. It actually it's serrated, and I dulled it down. I don't like to use kidneys that have serrations right out of the pack because the points are a little too sharp for me. I'll take a little file and bring it to the sander and just dull it down a little bit to where the teeth are a little bit more flat. This allows for good breaking for me. Okay, what you'll see here is I take the strips of clay, like I said, and I'll place them flat along the original clay flange. What this does is this translates into silicone. This will be the silicone flange for the silicone sleeve, the actual mold part of this, or the rubber part of this. So I will lay this around the entire perimeter to allow an even flange that can be caught or locked in place into the overall fiberglass jacket. Once again, you want to make sure not to press the clay too firmly into anything because that would translate, once you squish the clay, the thinner the clay, the thinner the silicone. So I'm going to go in very lightly, place them down, trim them to make sure the width is the overall width is actually even. Cutting off pieces as I go, instead of trying to smash them in place, just trimming and going. Once again, I'm cleaning up everything, making sure that there's no marks, no dings, no dents that can translate into locking points in the fiberglass shell. It's not so important that you do that with the silicone area or the area that will translate to silicone, but it is important that the flange that translates to fiberglass is smooth. So I'm taking the ribs that I used to place the perimeter or around the perimeter of the mask, and I'm putting them on the highest most points, pretty much in a cross pattern. The highest most points from the forehead down the center point of the chin, these will be keys. So I'm going to do this, like I said, from the forehead, top of the forehead, down to the bottom of the chin, blending them into the clay. Once again, making sure not to smash them into the piece, but place them. Any pieces that aren't blended fully, that's okay, because once you put the fiberglass in them, you can trim off that area later. Any area where the resin gets underneath those clay ribs, you can simply trim it out with an X-Acto blade, scalpel, or a Dremel. Okay, here I'm doing a cross pattern over the center of the forehead and the eyes, going down to where the temples would be, all the high points. Now, what this does is this will help lock or register, I should say, this will help register the silicone sleeve into the fiberglass jacket. So I'm speeding it up here, just cleaning up, making sure everything's trimmed, slimmed, ready to go, tapering things off. You do want this to be as draftable as you can get it, meaning that there's no locking points, true locking points in the silicone. So all I'm doing is just going in, cleaning up nicely, making sure not to pierce the clay all the way down to the piece. You don't want that. Okay, here it's very important what this is. So I'm using the same thickness of clay that I've used overall so far. What I'm placing here are locks. These are important because they keep the sleeve locked into the fiberglass jacket when you have the mold open. It's a good way to make sure that the flange and the overall silicone jacket or sleeve, I forget, making sure that the silicone does not actually shift in place when you have the mold closed. Because if you just simply have a piece, two pieces of silicone, and you put them together inside of a fiberglass jacket, you do risk the flange, the silicone flange that I'm placing them on, slipping within the fiberglass shell. So I place these in between the ribs, the registration points, the keys, I should say, that I've already placed. Just putting them in there in the spaces in between. These, like I said, are the same thickness as the ribs that I used earlier, but I actually cut them down I cut them very narrow. Just making sure to fill in all the spaces along the flange in between the keys themselves. Now I'm tapering them off at an angle here to make sure that they are draftable in the piece. You don't want these to truly lock into the piece and then you risk the silicone tearing. That's why I'm tapering these off. Now by this point you should begin to see a distinctive difference between what will translate to the silicone sleeve and the fiberglass jacket. Now what I'm doing that off camera you'll see soon enough is that I actually forgot to record putting down trapezoidal keys on the flange, which you'll see here. These translate to registration marks for the fiberglass shell later, and you'll see indentations of where they will, what they'll do, what they'll end up. Okay, so right now I did not record the fiberglass process because that'll be in a later video. And I honestly mostly think I forgot. So I'm taking a paint scraper and slowly, gently removing the piece from the board. Initially, I had said I did not secure the piece down, and this is why, because I needed to pry it up. So once this is off, I clean off the board because, you don't want to leave a mess. And then I'll go in, remove the foam, and begin to remove all of the clay that I used to build the fiberglass shell. All of the clay that I used that will translate to a silicone sleeve, I leave in place. That's very important. You don't want to take that away because that will become your silicone jacket. Here you can see the piece cleaned up completely, and you can see those trapezoidal indentations that are registration points for the fiberglass shell, or that will be the fiberglass shell. And I also taped up the bag to make sure that there was no clay that would go into the piece itself and dirty it. So from here, everything that I had initially said in the first half of the process, the first part, is going to translate over to this. So I'm going to take pieces of clay using the clay board that I had made to slice even thicknesses and lay that on the interior around the entire mask. Like I said, everything that I first went over to cover the first half of this mold will translate into the second half of this mold. So I'm going to go in, cover everything up, and if you are an experienced mold maker, you will see the undercut right there in the chin. That is not a big deal for what I'm doing, but because it has a bit of a swivel motion, I would be able to get the piece out easily. But if you're worried about that kind of an undercut, you can simply put extra clay there to make it draftable. So I go in, once I have the jacket down, I trim it up, and everything here you will see is from what I told you initially. All those registration points, the locks, all of that. Right here, you'll see these locks that I had put on the first half. Right there is a large key that will actually register and keep the silicone in place. But all of these little registration points will make sure that this silicone sleeve will register properly. Okay, I fast forward a good bit. All I did was I fiberglassed the clay piece that I put down in the previous section, and then I demolded it and removed the clay. What I'm pointing out here are all of the low points in the mold, and in these low points here, in the corners of these locks in the center, I tend to go overboard, but all of these points you're going to drill through because they will be vents for the silicone. Here in the registration points, in the keys, in these locks, all of those low points you want to actually drill out. And I say low points because currently this part is upside down. If I were to flip it over, I would say all the high points. So I'm fast forwarding it using my drill to go through and create these small vents. You don't want them large, small is fine. So I'm going to go in and make sure that I have all of that cleaned up. Like I said, I tend to go a little overboard, but it's better to be safe than sorry. In this next piece, you'll see this large hole. I used a hole saw. That is going to be where the pour spout is. I drilled it appropriate to the size of PVC that I had. You want to make sure that the PVC is going to be flush to the fiberglass on the inside of the mold. I will do that using a hot glue gun. So to hold it in place initially, I take Zap-A-Gap. You can use any Loctite brand, anything like that, and I glue around the area. Now, what I didn't do here is use the speed kicker, which is a little aerosol agent you can use to kick this. I actually held it in place and used the moisture from my finger, which I would not advise, to kick the super glue. But once this is in place, and like I said, make sure that the PVC is flush to the fiberglass. If you can't do that due to the shape, you can always trim it with a Dremel later. So once this kicks, I'm going to secure everything in place with hot glue gun. Now, take note, I don't put globs of hot glue on the interior of the mold because that would translate to thin spots in the silicone. So I go around the exterior and I hot glue it in place, making sure that this thing isn't going to go anywhere. I'm putting hot glue on the inside, but then I go ahead and quickly flatten it down to flush it to the surface. So this is where I will talk about all of the little registration points, the keys that will be in the silicone sleeve that will allow the two halves to come together. So the tool that I used for this was something I borrowed from a friend. It's actually a key maker. It's very handy. If you can find them online, go ahead and use it. But all I did was take a little bit of baby powder, put it on the piece, and then just push shallow depressions. You don't want to go too deep because once again, that will be very thin. I tend to use a Sharpie. The bottom end of a Sharpie works great as a registration point creating keys. So you do the same thing, create a pattern all along the surface. Some people say more keys the better. You don't want too many because that can create complications when trying to put the silicone together. Okay, so from here, I'm closing up the two fiberglass shells very gently, and I'm going to be bolting everything in place. And once you actually bolt these on the reverse end, you'll see it in just a minute. I take the wing nuts and I reverse them, making the wing part of the wing nuts actually face the mold, because when you go to tighten them down, they bite into the mold and make sure that it's not going anywhere. Another point to note that I didn't show you is that I released the inside. I sprayed the interior of the mold, the exposed area of the mold, and the piece itself with a release agent. I did also seal the clay with a enamel clear coat. So I do that first and then I release everything. That's very important. You want to make sure to release your piece. And a way to secure that this, the two halves, the two fiberglass shells won't cause any leaking, I go around the seam here and I seal it with hot glue. So I just go in there and I make sure that the hot glue seals everything. So right now I'm going to pour silicone. As you can see, I'm wearing my gloves. It's very important you do that when dealing with chemicals. So I can go ahead and start pouring now. And I actually pour from a higher angle. I did degas the silicone. That's very important. If you can't do that, then you can always just pour from a high point. In a moment, you'll begin to see the silicone seep out of the areas that we drilled, all of the vents. And you'll see how I plug that up in just a minute. But anyway, for now, I'm going to go ahead and continue pouring silicone. Also, the silicone I'm using is Mold Max 30 from Smooth On. Okay, just pouring out the excess here, and I'm about to turn it around to where you can see where those vents appear. Right here in the front, those spots right there, those are my initial vents. I'm going to take a little wood screw, put it in there, just make sure it's nice and tight, and then I'm just going to go very lightly with the screwdriver to make sure it's secure. I don't go crazy with this, I just go hand tight. You never want to use a drill for this because you'll drill straight through the piece, or through the shell into the mask underneath. So what you'll see is I'm also clogging up the low points. I'm blocking off the low points first. I'm not going to every vent, just the low points, because if you close off the vents too early, when you go to burp the mold, it will actually trap the air instead of releasing it. So once again, I'm going hand tight, and then we will continue from here. I think I'm going to go ahead and speed this up and just keep pouring. And then you will stop once you see the silicone not lowering anymore into the pour spout, and your highest points, your vents, will wind up leaking out silicone. All right, thank you for watching, guys. And like I said, if you have any questions about what you saw, put them in the comments below and I will try to get right to them. And also, any other video ideas you guys may want, add them in the comments below, and I will go ahead and try to keep making content to keep you guys, brain fart, sorry, to keep you guys entertained as well as educated. So thank you so much. Thank you for sticking with me. I'll see you in the next episode.